This session is really about the new focus on roads. What about that focus that supports economic development, and what does that mean at the national, regional and local scale? We're going to have what really passes for a keynote address, first of all, and then each of our other panelists is going to make a short statement of 3 or 4 minutes, and then we want you to join in as well. So I'm going to begin with David Quarmby. David Quarmby is the head of RJRF's Major Roads for the Future study. He has had a long career in policy, planning, management, operations and research, and most recently in transport and logistics. 4 decades of board-level experience in government, public agencies, private sector and research bodies. He's currently leading a 2-year study for the Reeve Jeffreys Road Fund on the future of England's major road network. And in recent years, he's been chairman of the RAC Foundation, a member of the Mayor's London Roads Task Force, and a trustee of the National Maritime Museum. So you see, he's got it all covered. So, David Quarmby.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Well, how highway investment can support national, regional and local economies and rebalance growth across the nation, that's the question for this session, as Kirsty has explained. And it couldn't have come at a better time, nor could there be a better or more relevant theme for this first Highways UK conference. Why? Because central government has consistently prioritised infrastructure and the regeneration of the economy for over 5 years now, throughout the last coalition government and strongly reinforced in this Parliament. As long ago as 2013, government set out ambitious plans for transport spending overall, with a rising spend on strategic roads through to 2020, although all other lines, including local authority, major projects and maintenance, remain pretty static over the same period. The only other one that goes up fast is HS2. The 2015 RIS investment plan for Highways England is now 13 billion, getting on for a third higher than it was even in 2013, and it actually overtakes investment in Network Rail by 2020. But you know, even if you deliver all the transport outcomes, it doesn't automatically lead to economic growth. So the question is this: having willed the ends, has government willed the means to deliver all this, and in the right way to help regenerate our regional and local economies? Are effective institutions and delivery mechanisms in place? My judgment, so far as roads are concerned, they've made a good start, but it's certainly not all in place yet. On roads, as we know, government has reformed Highways England and the planning and funding regime to go with it. It's created the National Infrastructure Commission to review long-term infrastructure challenges and to ginger things up. And it's promised a hypothecated road fund using vehicle excise duty receipts to provide long-term funding stability for the strategic road network from 2020. On local economies, local enterprise partnerships now work with local authorities to integrate land use, economic regeneration and transport improvements. They are increasingly using current business needs and their growth agenda to lead their local transport plans and bidding through local growth funds to get the resources. And on decision making, specific devolution deals, starting with Greater Manchester and moving through the northern combined authorities with possibilities for other areas, promise to devolve funding and streamline the decision-making processes. So a lot's happening. Well, I've been around long enough to see plenty of announcements by government that aren't much more than PR. But this time, I think these changes will and are already making a difference on the ground. Yet big challenges remain. I hope Highways England will be able to deliver their ambitious plans without getting the indigestion that has convulsed Network Rail and led to much pausing of projects recently. The local enterprise partnerships had a rocky start with still something of a chaotic map. Even now, several local authorities, shown in this slide in light blue, have to work with two overlapping LEPs. Inevitably, their capabilities and degrees of integration with their partner local authorities vary. But the concept is sound, and let's hope that the LEP movement matures and grows in its effectiveness, leading the regional conversations, getting agreement on priorities, and securing those resources. The biggest challenge, however, takes me right to the heart of the study that my colleague Phil Carey and I are doing for the Rhys Jeffreys Road Fund. Which are the really important roads that drive the regional economies in areas such as the northern conurbations and in the high-tech arc running from Cambridge through Milton Keynes to the Thames Valley and the M4 corridor? Now, according to conventional wisdom, those are the motorways and trunk roads run by Highways England, the strategic road network. But is that all? Is the SRN enough to define all the roads that matter? Talk to those who want to grow their businesses and reach out to new markets, or tap new talent in a wider labour pool, or those who just want to keep going in the face of growing congestion, poorly maintained roads, and unreliable journeys. They know it's not just the motorways and key dual carriageways that count, vital though they are. It's also the other busy A roads that link the centres, connect to the motorways, and provide for those essential cross-country journeys. And the local authorities, who are responsible for them, know that only too well, as do the LEPs. So the first question was, in our study, how do you define the major road network, as we call it, that underpins the functioning and growth of our regional and sub-regional economies? It must, in our view, bring in the more strategic A roads on the local authority network by identifying high traffic volumes, particularly with high percentages of heavy goods vehicles and vans, and ensuring connectivity for towns of 50,000 population and over. We have defined a major road network, MRN, that at 8,000 miles is about 80% more than the SRN alone. Now, to us, this MRN seems feasible and sensible. For example, it fills out the significant road network in the West Yorkshire conurbation, ringed here, where the strategic road network is really only the M62 and the M1 motorways. And in this one, you see how the MRN in red singles the important corridors which cut right across the SRN, such as the arc I've already mentioned, linking Cambridge through Milton Keynes and Oxford to the M4. There again links into East Anglia and links from the south coast across to Bristol. But there's no substitute for local knowledge to substantiate our thinking. We've met with 5 groups of LEPs and local authorities to validate our concept of the major road network being an integral of the SRN and the important local authority roads, and to explore its relevance to their planning for growth and their sustaining of their regional economies. It seems to work for them. Now, we're not going to suggest where specific road improvements would be needed to support growth, nor are we suggesting any changes in the responsibilities of Highways England or the local authorities. Our interest is in the process. How best should the planning of transport interventions be carried out, informed by an understanding of what both the current economy and future growth in housing and employment needs? First, it demands that the planning of the road network in a region needs to be done in a holistic way for the MRN as a whole, that is, the relevant sections of both the strategic road network and the important roads in the local authority network. Many of the most congested parts of the motorway network are caused by local traffic going only 2 or 3 junctions, particularly around the conurbations, M62, A34 approaching Oxford, parts of the M25. Easing today's pressure may involve overhauling parts of the local major road network. Equally, trunk road improvements or even new alignments can ease pressure on local major roads. The best solutions must not be constrained by the radically different planning and funding regime as between Highways England on the one hand and local authorities on the other. And we believe Highways England's new wave of route strategies should embrace the broad approach of looking holistically at the regional networks of which their own routes are a part. Now, it is a mark of the culture change already visible in Highways England, and great to see that these joint planning dialogues are already taking place. The M27 Southampton Junctions project is an early example of joint delivery of improvements to HE and the local authority roads, though all funded in this case by Highways England. And the Memorandum of Understanding between Highways England and Transport for Greater Manchester is probably a template for others. But we're suggesting something more fundamental. A consistent approach for the major road network means a similar planning and funding regime for the SRN and for local authority major roads. This would require a RIS-style 5-year planning process and funding commitment to govern agreed improvements on the local authority MRN alongside the SRN. Now this, I recognise, would completely change the basis for funding the revenue and capital expenditure on the most important 3,500 miles of local authority roads in England. But it would also address the yawning gap between the complex funding mechanisms and lower resources for local authority road maintenance and capital on the one hand, and that for Highways England on the other. Is this practical? Well, out of the blue in July came the Chancellor's decision to create a hypothecated road fund from 2020 to fund England's strategic roads. As I've argued, the SRN has a slightly patchy presence across England, denser in some areas than in others. And we are not alone in believing it doesn't represent the whole network of strategically important roads that underpin the regional and sub-regional economies of our nation. While the numbers would need looking at very carefully, there is a good case for considering how the road fund could support the whole of the major road network, not just the Highways England portfolio. Thank you, and there's our website.
Thank you very much indeed. And of course, it's worth saying that a lot of the slides that are up on the PowerPoint that nobody can see at the back will be on the website and will presumably also be put on after the conference. Well, that's there's a good food for thought there about the MRN and also this idea of a holistic approach and the road fund. So let's now turn to someone who's looking at this issue from a national level. Martin Fellows is the Divisional Director, Strategy and Planning for Highways England, who's an economist by training and held a number of technical and operational leadership roles since joining the Highway Agency in 2008 and surviving to be part of Highways England as well. So you were responsible for delivering Highway England's first strategic business plan, now focused on leading the company's response to the newly established monitoring regime by ORR and Transport Focus. Can we have your 3 minutes?
Thank you. Arguably the biggest single and most heavily used piece of infrastructure in the country, the strategic roads network is used, as we've already heard today, by millions of people every day. It moves goods and services to market and is very important to our economic base, as we know from the recent survey, when 98% of manufacturers said roads were critical to the success of their businesses. But there's a challenge of being a 24/7, 365 days a year open network. A network that is important to everybody in this room and beyond, because it connects us to our work, to our family and friends, and to our leisure activities. We all agree of the significance and importance of a modern, reliable and well-functioning network, and the importance that has on delivering growth. It goes into reducing delays that frustrate us all. It helps to create and safeguard jobs and opens up opportunities for development and increases productivity and enables businesses to compete effectively on a global scale. However, we understand at Highways England the competing pressures that a network that seeks to serve a multitude of economic purposes creates. It is a national and international network, but it also, as David has talked about, seeks to meet the needs and expectations of the emerging subnational and city region agendas. And it also looks to unlock local growth aspirations, and much of our work around working with local enterprise partnerships is based on doing exactly that. But the way we think about the strategic road network is changing. The way we plan, invest and manage and operate the network is changing. And government has made a start. With its roads investment strategy, and we've heard lots about that today, with opening up opportunities in housing and employment sites, and we may hear more in the Chancellor's statement later on today, and in areas of reform such as the vehicle excise duty that David touched upon earlier. But we at Highways England have also made a start. With many of the changes we've implemented, you've heard some of those already from our Chief Executive earlier, but around the developments of smart motorways, around the Dartford Free Flow scheme, and pinch points where we've worked with local authorities to deliver real solutions that generate local economic growth. But the landscape is changing too. Devolution, localism, we've heard about already, local funding, authority funding pressures, and the ever-increasing drive to deliver more efficiently. But we must be holistic, a word we've already heard. We must be holistic in our approach. It's not just about adding capacity or the stopping and starting investment in the times of funding pressure. We will need to make sometimes difficult choices, yet ones informed by better knowledge and understanding not only of network's performance, but also the asset itself and our customers' needs and wants. So I'll leave you with some challenges and some what I would call wicked questions that we at Highways England are considering and working very closely with our partners. What part should infrastructure play in the economic rebalancing of the country? The north-south divide? Is it the North and Midlands divide? Is it the south and the southwest divide? How do we develop the integrated transport system that will be essential if we are to realise the economic benefits of major infrastructure investment? How do we build the evidence and informed approach that goes beyond simply studying or restudying known problems or investing where people shout the loudest? What is the appetite for change to unlock land for development adjacent to parts of the network that are not already at or nearing or over capacity? And how do we transform the capability and capacity of our supply chain in order to meet the sheer scale of challenge of investment over the coming years? And we all must do this whilst making safety of road users, workers and those living near the network our highest priority. I was going to leave you with a question, but I'm actually going to turn it into a plea. How do we today turn the dialogue that we have within this conference into real action? How do we become much better at brigading the service the scarce resources that we have in order to deliver the service and the growth that our customers and road users demand at an affordable price. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now another Martin who's going to be looking at this from the regional level. Martin Tugwell is the Programme Director, England's Economic Heartland Strategic Alliance. Martin's got more than 20 years of experience in strategic transport and infrastructure planning at national, regional and indeed at local levels. He's Programme Director for England's Economic Heartland, a strategic alliance of county and unitary councils and local enterprise partnerships covering Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Northamptonshire, Milton Keynes and Bedfordshire. This is promoting a new model of integration, this whole idea of integration for strategic planning and delivery. Martin.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and it's great to be here. You'll maybe have seen a sort of a bit of a synergy with some of the introductions that David made in his reference to the major road study that they're doing, and that's quite deliberate. And we've been one of the partners that have been working with the study to actually look and see what the identification of a major road network might mean for us. But let me just, as I say, start by introducing you to the Strategic Alliance. England's Economic Heartland. You've probably heard about the Northern Powerhouse. You may have heard about Midlands Connect. But this is where the Economic Heartland is. This is an area of £71 billion economy. And just in case you're wondering, that's not an economy that's dependent upon London. It's not a city-region economy. It's an economy that's very much the new economy. It's driven by entrepreneurs, productivity, the new kind of technology, which is what government nationally is saying we need to be supporting. And it's a very successful one. 140,000 businesses, 10,000 houses a year being delivered. It's the kind of economy which gives you 40% greater return on your investment, 30% faster. And that's why it's an economy which delivers a net contribution to the exchequer every single year. So infrastructure is really, really important, not just for us, but it's because it's an infrastructure for serving the heartland of the UK and beyond. If you look at the imports and the exports through the ports, everywhere from Felixstowe round the south coast to Southampton, pretty much everything will come through the infrastructure in the heartland area. So we have challenges, we have problems. We have one of the busiest business aviation airports in the country as one of our international gateways, Luton Airport. So even though we have success, we still have a long way to go though, because compared with our global competitors as regions, we are still a long way behind. So when businesses are telling us, businesses located in our area, businesses who want to invest, that they want leadership on transport, that they want a transport system, not a series of networks, they want a system that helps them deliver the growth, we have got to listen. We've got to treat our investment just like any other part of a business. If we don't invest in it, if we don't continue to invest in it, it won't stay still, it will go backwards, it will decline. And the businesses that are driving the economic growth, they will go too. And it's not a competition between parts of the UK, it's a competition with the rest of the world. So we have to invest, we have to deliver that growth. If we get it right, the prize is huge. As an area, we have consistently given the country more growth per year than any other part of the country. If we can meet our potential, we can deliver another 20% per annum in terms of economic growth. What does that actually mean? It means over £10 billion a year growth. So when we're starting to have a conversation this afternoon about the consequences of the Northam statement and the spending review, think about how important it is to maintain investing and delivering growth in our area. Because we need a framework that delivers to investors the confidence, the clarity, the certainty that actually allows them to make their judgments. Which is why the Alliance is focusing on having a single strategic voice, being very clear about having priorities, and being very clear and focused about the importance of aligning all the multitude of funding streams, because we have a number of them to do, but frankly businesses aren't interested about how we do it, they just want us to do it. So the importance of the Alliance is about having strategic leadership rather than centralised direction. It's about having flexibility locally within a framework that's set nationally, and it's about strategic planning at scale that allows the local conditions for success to be created. Investment in partnerships such as the Strategic Alliance are important. We need to spend time nurturing them. We need to let them grow, and we need to let them deliver. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, from a regional perspective to a city perspective, and Ben Plowden, who's Director of Strategy and Planning for Surface Transport for London. He's responsible for providing the overall strategic direction for surface transport in the capital, and he's the man that I blame for the soul journey into London for all those poor people coming from XL into the city. His extensive experience in the workings of both national and local government, from the outside as an environmental campaigner and the inside as a senior director at TfL. He's also a non-executive director for the transport system Catapult. Ben.
Kirsty, thank you very much. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here at the inaugural conference for Highways UK. I'm going to talk about the importance of roads in a city like London, but not just London, any town or city in the country. I'm going to set out 7 or 8 propositions and then leave you with some summary thoughts, which hopefully we can come back to in the Q&A. So the first proposition is that the road network in a city is absolutely fundamental to the social and economic vitality of that city. In London, 80% of all passenger journeys are on the road network, and more than 90% of all freight and servicing by volume also travels on the road network. So it's a critical part of how the economy functions, both in the city but beyond in the wider regional and indeed national economy. People often think that the task of planning for the road network is predominantly a technical task. Technical modelling, engineering, highway design, gradient specification. It's also, though, very importantly, what I would call a wicked political issue, because the question about how you manage the road network optimally is not subject to simple binary answers. There are competing views of the right outcome. There are multiple stakeholders with different views about what the road network should be for and who should come first. If I get a pedestrian crossing outside my children's primary school, you can't drive your van to your shop quite as quickly as you could the day before. So in order to plan for the road network properly, you have to have both the technical skills you need to think about it as a physical set of infrastructure, but also the political skill to think about how it looks and feels and is regarded by different interests in the community. Now, the road network is valuable to a city and indeed the national economy because it produces a flow of services to that economy. And those services can be divided into 2 broad categories. The first, and these are illustrated by this brilliant artwork, which you might think was my 11-year-old daughter, in fact it's all my own work, there are signed copies available afterwards, is the traditional role of road network as moving goods and services. They're corridors and arteries down which people and goods flow, as you've heard from both David and the 2 Martins, to support the economy of the city. But critically, and particularly in cities, they are also important for the living services that they provide. They are the public spaces in which civic life plays out. They're what developers want to be filled with cafes and high-end residential development. They're where the library is, they're where the sports centre is. They are the high streets and the byways of the city's life. And it's really, really important in an urban context to take account of both the moving function of the network and its living function. Now, you can categorise roads, and we've done this through the Roads Task Force that David Quarmby mentioned, according to whether the function of the road is important for either its living function or its moving function, or, in the hard cases, for both. So you can use a very simple 3x3 matrix where you rank a section of road according to low, medium or high importance for either or both of those functions, and that gives you a really solid foundation for thinking about the investment priorities, operational and management priorities, enforcement, the whole set of resources that you apply to a road network to get the best possible outcome for the city and for the wider society. We're currently in the process of working with all 33 London boroughs in a process which is very like what David's been doing with Rhys Jeffries, which is looking at the road network in London by length and saying, what does this road do for the local community, what does it do for the London economy, and how can we design and manage it accordingly? So you have to take account of both the moving function and the living function of the city, otherwise you won't capture the full economic importance of the road network. So, 3 propositions. Roads are fundamental to the city's economy. Secondly, it's important for both the moving and the living function of that economy, and you can and need to categorise roads according to which of those 2 functions or both the road network plays, and then invest, plan, manage and operate accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. So we're going to go right from city and we're going to spread right out to Europe to speak to David Beddell, who's the End Market Director, Highways Europe, Aecom. You're a chartered civil engineer, significant experience in planning, design, procurement and implementation of major highways and infrastructure works in the UK and also critically the overseas market. As the end market director, he carries executive responsibility for Aecom's highways operation right across Europe, harnessing client relationships, developing over Aecom's team of 1,200 highway professionals. Take it away.
Okay, good morning. Thank you very much, Kirsty. Less is more, they said. Challenge the status quo in less than 3 minutes, I was advised. Kirsty is very rigid on her 3 minutes, they warned. Let's see how we go. We've heard a number of very different viewpoints from my fellow panelists this morning on the role that the road network plays in a national or regional level. But a common golden thread amongst all of those, I think, was the intrinsic role that a modern and reliable road network has in facilitating economic growth. It seems that we're awash at the moment with multiple investment plans and strategic documents, each of which outlines how the UK's road network is meant to be best developed. But are they complementary? And do they fully consider the needs of other transport modes and the impacts that they place on the road network? RIS and the National Infrastructure Plan are very English-centric, but the embers of Scottish independence still burn. And the debate around the UK's own independence as part of Europe still lumbers upon us. So should our focus there not be a little wider? Should we not think of a component of the UK rather than an individual component? Is there therefore not a compelling argument that the wider network needs need to be considered in a more holistic manner? Do we need a national transport strategy that articulates a cohesive and long-term vision for our road network? Perhaps one that is considerate of emerging technologies and future trends in travel patterns. Would a National Roads Authority bring that cohesion? Or do we feel that the current model that we have that manages national and regional elements of the network in relative autonomy is still fit for purpose? Quite frankly, users of the road network, including those business users who underpin economic growth, they don't recognise the network boundaries that we operate in, and nor do they care. But similarly, those who are responsible for network operation within those boundaries are quite diverse. They range from Highways England to much smaller local highway authorities, each with their own network strategy and their own autonomous asset management plan. So are we really right to expect our road network to support regional and national economic policy effectively against such a fragmented backdrop? Perhaps a major roads network, such as the Oxford to Cambridge arc that David referred to earlier, will bring us a greater degree of cohesion in this respect. But how should these regions interact? What governance arrangements are needed to support growth and ensure that regional aspirations are balanced and considered alongside national needs? Do network responsibilities need to be changed in order to allow LEPs to fully mature and be truly effective in driving regional and economic prosperity at all levels? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, that leaves us just under half an hour for conversation. And actually, I just want to put that very last point to you, David Quarmby. This idea that actually, rather than having individual different transport methods and also different regional and SRN and MRN all separate, what about actually having an overarching national transport strategy?
I think the existing strategic road network is the core of a national transport system on roads. But I think the problem with the national transport strategy, as you describe it, Kirsty, is that it implies that it's imposed from the top. And I think the strength of what's happening now with the devolution to the combined authorities and the bids from other groups to take more responsibility for their own outcomes means that the most effective strategies for our economy will be those that are nurtured and grown on a regional basis.
But not single transport. I mean, that's the point.
No,
It's got
no.
to be integrated transport.
It certainly has to be integrated. And while we've been talking about roads here, the authorities concerned, whether you're talking about Transport for Greater Manchester or the Strategic Alliance or London, they are rightly and definitely taking a multimodal approach. But let's not forget how important roads are.
What do you make of the Heartland strategy?
I think it's absolutely right. Martin didn't show a geography of the Heartland strategy, but embracing this arc that runs from Oxford through to Milton Keynes, Bedford, Luton, Aylesbury and Cambridge, it is absolutely right, I think, to view that as one economy and to look to strengthening the links that join up the different bits of those economy. And the reason it's difficult is because the rail network is radial. Apart from the new east-west line, there's nothing that links that arc on a rail basis, and the road links need to be improved to make that high-tech arc function effectively. So it's a good plan.
Can I just check? I just want to ask you to look beyond the Heartland strategy, and what you've talked about is, I don't need this, sorry. What you've talked about is the delivery in terms of GDP, of growth and everything else. And I wonder, I mean, you've got a particular nucleus of types of business, I think, within this area, and I wonder in terms of regeneration, other areas of the country, whether a similar strategy could deliver the same results, or whether it's because of the nature of the type of businesses that's in your area.
So I think the key thing here is to have, as David's talked about, it having come from the bottom up. We're working on the evidence base that comes from the levels of growth we need to look at, from the voices of businesses who are telling us. They are telling us that they want a single transport system, one that can meet their needs, one that can meet the needs of their employees. And if we think about it, those employees are actually residents of the area. And as residents, we want a single transport system as well. The balance will always have to reflect the local circumstances, which is why it's right that you've got something different in transport for the north, right that you have something for Midlands Connect, right for us. But fundamentally, it's about joining it up, being clear to both residents and investors what the priorities are, working with agencies like Highways England and Network Rail, and making it all joined up.
Can I just come back to a city level here? I'm sorry, I'm jumping around, but I'm absolutely astonished that 90% of passengers in London are by road. You don't want that, surely?
No, so 80% actually of passenger journeys are on the road network, which is not in any way to underestimate the importance of both the underground and the overground network, particularly for radial commuting and increasingly for orbital journeys, hence the investment in Crossrail to improve that connectivity. But the crucial point is that actually, and particularly in outer London, a very substantial proportion of how people move around a city like London is on the road network, and actually most of those people are not public transport users either. They're people driving in their vans, their cars, their taxis, on their bikes and walking around. So I think the point of that really is to emphasise that you need to manage and maintain your road network just as important as you do your rail network, because of the importance of that network, and again, even more so for freight. It's very, very hard to deliver local freight on a rail network, and that's why pretty much all freight in London goes on the roads.
Just another, hang on, just another London-centric question here. And the Chancellor's going to make this huge announcement this afternoon about house building. A lot of that heat's going to be in the southeast. You're going to have more and more people looking for the only houses they can afford, which will be miles out of the centre for London, but having to work in London. How are you going to manage that? Because that's going to be an exponential growth, unless you're going to suddenly find lots and lots of cheap houses in the middle of London, which will be pigs flying across the horizon.
So I may regret saying this, and I think this is the first mayoral election since the mayoralty was established where the basic efficiency and effectiveness of the transport system won't be one of the top issues. Housing and the related questions around social inclusion and access to work, including for people on low incomes, is going to be the key issue at the forthcoming election, we think. And the question about how TfL and the boroughs, both from a transport investment and operations point of view, but also in terms of, for example, using their land assets, can support a mix of housing types, and not just in the outer parts of the city either, is going to be fundamentally important to how London maintains a balanced economy. I was at an event about a year ago where the American economist Edward Glaser was talking about cities, and he was asked in the Q&A what the most important problem for London would be, and he said the availability of affordable housing within the city's boundaries, because if you have to travel 20 miles to do a job which doesn't pay you very much, it becomes very, very difficult for the economy to sustain itself. So we really have to provide a mix of housing, not just on the outskirts either, but across the whole of the city.
Thank you very much. Just coming back to David Quarmby's original presentation and talking about the importance of MRN as well as SRN and whether or not that should be a holistic approach, and is it a holistic enough approach at the moment?
I think from our perspective, we've looked at, with route strategies, and David mentioned about the need for route strategies to engage with the process of looking at a wider a network that's beyond the strategic road network, and I think it's a really interesting conversation and debate that we need to have with many of the stakeholders that are in this room now to understand whether there is merit in actually broadening the strategic road network, certainly from an economic perspective, certainly for addressing some of the challenges that the local, the city, the national perspective that many of the people sat on the panel are going to face over the years to come.
What do you mean before you actually set out the second tranche, as it were?
Yes, I think we're open. We undertook the first process of route strategies relatively quickly. We are open now for a debate about how do we take forward the next round of route strategies, and I think David's timing around his study is particularly helpful for us giving that thinking now.
Can we just talk about European experience? I'm anxious to talk about somebody who, sorry? Oh. I'm anxious to hear about where perhaps in Europe you think is delivered this holistic approach the best, and what it's delivered for the local residents and businesses.
So I think the road network, there's a huge variance, first of all, in Europe, and I think we need to acknowledge that. There are elements of the network in continental Europe that are very mature, much more mature than here in the UK. The size of those networks and the geographic kind of demographic of how they are related also influences delivery strategy. So we do see far more private tolling of strategic networks. We see far greater use of technology in areas, particularly in more developed areas of Europe, and that's, we are making strides there in the UK, but there is a lot more to be done. We live in a modern age of big data. We all have handheld mobile devices, and I think a big challenge for the industry in general is how we come together and harness that data set to predict trends of the future and use it to inform a modern, sustainable network for the next 20 years and beyond.
But that's interesting. Do you think that you're doing enough in terms of the whole idea of harnessing technology, even side by side with the SRN? Because it seems that if we're behind now, we're going to be, if things are moving exponentially in Europe, we're going to end up being further behind.
I think the short answer to that is no, we're not. I think we talked earlier about open data and making sure that that data is available to people who have a better understanding of how to communicate that data effectively to people within their vehicles, within their own devices, as we've already mentioned. So I think from our perspective that this next 5 years is going to be critical in terms of delivering that kind of investment in infrastructure, in investment in technology that will help to realise some of the advantages that we realise that are seen in continental Europe.
Well, let's just talk about Heartland, because of course a lot of the businesses in your areas are the high-tech businesses and presumably have their own ideas about how to deliver through.
And I think this is one of the biggest challenges for those in the public sector, is actually how to unlock and enable the entrepreneurs to really deliver the opportunities. In fairness, what we've seen in London is when London has opened up its data and it's let the entrepreneurs rip in terms of what they can provide, the market responds. There are hundreds of apps produced every year. The public latch on to one or two that meets their needs. We need to be able to build upon that kind of experience and open up our data, encourage the entrepreneurs, who are quite often the local businesses themselves, so it's a win-win-win situation, and allow the sort of technology to actually help shape and address some of the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, David, are you disappointed that we do seem to be behind in terms of technology?
I'm not so sure we are totally, but technology affects what we're talking about in many different ways. It affects how vehicles are developing, And I think we are up there. I mean, the vehicle industry is global anyway, but we're up there among the early adopting nations, setting out the framework within which more and more automated vehicles will be capable of operating on our roads. Technology for users of transport, there's been reference to the apps that exist when transport operators provide open data. Transport for London does. It's great that Highways England is doing that, and others are doing it too. It's entirely up to the market then, as we see, you know, take out your smartphones, how many apps have you got there that tells you when your next bus is coming, when your next train is coming. I think, you know, it's a very fertile area. On infrastructure, Jim O'Sullivan has made some reference to this, and I've heard others in the industry talking about this. I think Highways England recognise there is huge scope for innovation, not only in how the network is operated and managed, but how projects are delivered, indeed designed, conceived and delivered. And I think Jim O'Sullivan's mention of Highways England looking to its supply chain to be innovative in how they do things, in solutions to some of the highway construction problems, I think that's really great. Okay, we've got a lot of some areas in which to catch up with other nations. I think we're not doing so badly. At least we realise we need to move forward.
Jim O'Sullivan is going to be doing a keynote address over from the main stage straight after this. But just because Milton Keynes is in your area, and actually I was at a conference where Will Whitehorn spoke. Tell me about the driverless car projects that are in your area. Sorry, I have to give you this.
Well, I was going to say Ben can probably as a non-exec director of the traffic, but yeah, I mean the Catapult is a really exciting, and the driverless technology that's part of the Catapult technology there. I think it's an illustration of how if we create the opportunities for entrepreneurs to test the ideas in an environment, in a real world environment, we can actually accelerate our leadership in this, because we are, let's be, you know, in terms of automotive and driverless technology, we are up there in terms of some of the ideas that are coming. It comes from the global manufacturers that are interested in the work already, the pilots that are going and funded by the department. Milton Keynes is at the cutting edge of that. Is also at the cutting edge of opening up its data sources to allow people to develop ideas. I think it's an example of how when you create a living laboratory, people will want to play.
I want to open this up to the audience right now, but just to ask you finally, before I open up to the audience, are driverless cars, as it were, on the radar when it comes to Highways England?
Absolutely, yes. We're working very closely with pilots that are already being developed, and it's an exciting area for us to focus on over the coming years. So I'm looking forward to it as much as certainly my 14-year-old is looking forward to driving his driverless car when he's old enough to drive. So I'm not quite sure I'm looking forward to it so much, but not the insurance premiums anyway.
Oh God. Okay, now we have 2 microphones out here, and we'd love to get you. There's a gentleman down here first of all. Is there someone at this side for seconds? Yes, gentleman up there wants to talk about local roads. I know you do. So let's take your question first.
My name is John Walker, and I'm the Honorary Secretary of the ITS United Kingdom Road User Charging Interest Group. The subject of road user charging has come up a couple of times. You asked Paul O'Sullivan that question. I wanted to advertise the fact that we have a session on the benefits of road pricing in the little tent next door at 5 to 1. But my question, sort of following on from that, is the answer to the major roads network that David Quarmby and other people talked about more toll roads rather like the M6 toll?
In the short term, no, I don't think it is. Road user charging has a role to play in the long term, I'm quite sure. But you can't debate it in isolation from the context. If you think about road user charging as an eventual part substitute for fuel tax, then it simply can be put in a fiscally neutral way, and then becomes something you can use to manage demand. It's something which isn't suffering from the problem of the declining fuel tax base. So whether you use it as a revenue raiser, a demand manager, or simply a substitution for existing taxes, you've got to answer those questions. What are you talking about? And it's not politically on the agenda at the moment, for all the reasons we know well. We do have the first introduction of hypothecated funding, so that people who pay their vehicle excise duty will be told where their money's going. That's a start, but I think road user charging, the way you describe it, is a long way off, because nobody's yet really debated the purpose and the context of it.
Well, but in Europe it's a different story. Or the other parts of Europe, I should say, at the moment.
Yeah, I think there are some examples of successful road user charging in the UK, none more so than here in London with the congestion charging. But similarly, the congestion charging in Manchester did not gather momentum, did not reach equal success. We need to look at what we have here in the UK. We're a rather small island. We have a very congested road network. And it therefore brings the whole question of the economic viability of tolling into question when there are such available parallel free routes. So the business case for road user charging on a wider strategic basis needs to be considered in that context, I think. And I think that's where the continental Europeans are slightly different to us.
I have a slightly different answer to your question, because I think, for me, switch it back. We are consumers of transport. Each and every one of us, at some point during the course of the year, will probably be on a bus, a train, use the car. We will all use different types of transport. At the moment, we don't have a perfect view of how much it costs for each of our journeys. We're starting to see it. We can see on apps, we can get access to information about how much and how long it'll take for our train journeys. The government is talking about asking the bus industry to open up its information sources so that we get a better transparency. We've got things like Uber and other applications making it much more transparent about the cost of taxis. What I think you're seeing is technology equipping the consumer with more information about the cost of their journey, and I would start to see probably that the technology the entrepreneurs will start making those choices more obvious. So I think at one level, I wouldn't ask about the how we're going to do it. It's a question of how the industry will respond to a consumer need.
Would you like to pass over to Highways England?
Yes, I think from our perspective, obviously, the debate around road user charging has continued for some time. I think I'm very much in David's camp in terms of the decisions around road user charging are probably some way away. Again, it's a government choice for us. We're in the position to implement whatever is decided by government. So I think from our perspective, it's a watching brief that we'll continue to look at very closely and work very closely with government if that's the direction of travel it determines.
Yes, gentlemen there, you'd like to have a microphone?
A question for Ben. I was a bit confused, but in your talk you were talking about 80% of journeys in London are passenger journeys. I think what you mean is the vast majority, or the majority, are actually car journeys. And since that's the case, could you tell us what you're planning to do in London for car users? You know, we've got this massive 16 billion fund for Crossrail. Crossrail 2 is going to be probably some sort of similar price, but these are sort of not the main modes of transport. So what are you actually going to be doing for car users?
So I didn't quite hear your question, but I think the question is what are we doing for car users in London as part of the overall mix? So the point about 80% of passenger journeys is it's both car users but also people using public transport on the road network, bus passengers in particular, but also pedestrians and cyclists account for that 80%. So the Roads Task Force that David mentioned that TfL supported was a commitment that the Mayor had to set it up in his 2012 manifesto, was a process by which all the main road user stakeholders were brought together: car drivers, taxi drivers, bikes, cyclists, pedestrians, road safety lobby, the freight industry and so on, to talk about how do you manage a road network when the prospect of really substantial increases in new capacity, like Crossrail will provide for the rail network, doesn't look like it's going to happen, at least in the immediate future. And the view that the Roads Task Force took was, first of all, the point I made in my short presentation, which is you have to take account of both the moving function of the road network in a city and its living function, because the economic value of the road network derives from both of those roles. You have to do whatever you can to get the maximum amount of capacity out of the road network for any given level of capacity, and that's around smart traffic technology, it's around real-time response to collisions, it's around using intelligent data in real time to drive where your resources go. And there were 2 or 3 other strategic proposals that were put forward by the task force, which TfL agreed on behalf of the Met to take away and consider. One was a question around whether in some locations there was an argument for putting in additional or new tunnels, which might have had one of 2 functions. In the first case, this was to put in short tunnels that would take away the segregating effect of major roads in local communities, where you might be able to pay for the tunnel by decking over or tunneling and then releasing the value of the land on the surface, creating economic development potential and then using that to pay for the tunnel. And potentially longer distance tunnels, for example, that might provide a bypass in quotes around central London and relieve some of the pressure on the inner ring road. So that work is now going on. We're looking at what the prospect in certain locations for those sorts of investments might be. The task force, apropos the previous question, asked TfL and the Mayor to keep the question of road pricing firmly on the agenda, not to rule it out because of the potential benefit both as a way of managing demand but also generating revenue to pay for the road network. And then thirdly, there's a very particular question around managing freight, where because of the importance of freight in the road network and because it's very hard to move freight in any other way, thinking about how we can, for example, get freight out of the peak periods overnight into the afternoon, things like that.
Great, thank you very much. Your question, please.
Yeah, Bob Pizzey. With my CIHT Chair of the South East region hat on, I struggle with national v regional when some of these alliances are pulled together and we have ideas that sort of northern powerhouses and what does London do when, you know, so much of the population doesn't live in London that supports London. And I sort of, you know, an element of detail thinking about, and I really agree with David talking about, you know, building that strategic road network so they can cope with it. I sort of think, how does transport really work? And I wonder the panel's views with regard to things like, you know, it's not picking on Martin, but I happen to know Martin's area a little bit better. But we have the economic heartland that is going to compete on a global market, yet doesn't have Dover as the gateway to Europe in it, and doesn't have Heathrow as, you know, one of the world's busiest airports, where, you know, a lot of the people, his clients and his businesses will do business, you know, will do their business, and yet that's not in there. So how does he coordinate all that sort of thing to make sure he's maxing out and supporting on a global network?
Thank you.
That's why we have a strategic road network, and that's why we have an organisation called Network Rail and the market of passenger and freight operators, to think strategically about what the nation needs as a whole, to link with the ports, to link with major centres of industry, major logistics centres, major population centres. So we have the national framework in place, and we've been hearing today about how for roads that's being taken forward in this, I think, very energetic and really forward-looking way with Highways England under their new regime. What has been missing, I feel, and I think a lot of other people feel, is the ability to make things work on a local and a regional basis. And that's why we're seeing this great push towards the combined authorities in the north of England, why we're seeing the push of places like the Strategic Alliance that Martin works with. It's at that level where most business needs transport. Of course, they need the connections to the markets and the ports and exports and Dover, but they need to operate effectively on a regional basis too. Hence the focus, hence the devolution deals, hence our proposals to look at what is needed on a regional basis with the major road network. So regional used to be a word, perhaps it still is, that the politicians in this government and the last government don't like to use. I don't care what they do and do not like to use. The fact is, it's at the regional level that people want to see the energy, the coordination, and the coming together of the transport, economic, and land use planning. And thank goodness we're beginning to see it.
Regional?
Yes, a big fan of regional, primarily because I came from the Regional Development Agency's background. So one of the things I think is very important is for us to learn the lessons from the regional development agencies. I think one of the failings, there were many failings, there were many successes of the RDAs as well, but one of them was to be spread so thin across their agendas that they simply couldn't focus on some of the most important issues. Now, I would say transport, I think, and I'm sure many of my colleagues would agree, is one of those big significant issues that really drives economic growth. And I really do hope that the bodies that are forming, that are developing that currently and in the future, will focus very heavily with ourselves, with Network Rail and others, on delivering the transport network that this country really deserves.
David.
Yeah, I think the growth of the regional agenda is fantastic to see. I think we need to see greater cohesion between those regional forums. We can't move forward on a scenario where one region is developing in silo without giving cognizance to how that interfaces with the rest of the network. And I think the challenge that Highways England have is understanding, in terms of economic growth, how that interurban business needs to use the network. And does it necessarily need to recognise the benefit in the end region? Does the benefit of the strategic road network need to be recognised on the M20 as we move towards Dover? It doesn't matter so long as that 15 to 20 minute journey reliability that our freight industry is crying out for is actually recognised and guaranteed at a point in the network.
More regional connection.
So, two things. First of all, we heard in the opening session the importance about having leadership. The strategic alliance has come about because the political leaders of the transport authorities recognise what everybody else has said on the panel. Transport doesn't recognise boundaries, and there are some pieces of infrastructure which are obviously much bigger than one individual area. So if people were looking for political leadership, you had initially the 3 county council leaders standing up and recognising that they needed to work together. And if you have those blocks, those bigger blocks working together, it becomes a conversation between 2 or 3 organisations rather than a conversation between 24 or 30 or however many. It focuses on the right thing. You're absolutely right. Focus on the core issues, don't get distracted, and provide the leadership that everybody can respond to.
Final question here, yep.
Hi, it's Rosamund Gray here from Gattaca Associates. My question is about the relationship that Highways England and all these bodies have with utility providers and statutory undertakers. We all know that they're a bit of a law unto themselves, but it's a relationship that we can't ignore. If roads are being built across the nation, and it's a great thing that they're being improved, there is a skill shortage within the statutory undertakers to design diversions and protection works, and they're also very reluctant to do it. And I just wondered how far back the relationship goes into trying to sort out that shortage.
And do you need to slap wrists, bully people about a bit?
I think we've tried that. We've tried every approach with statutory undertakers over the years. I come from an operational background, and I remember the plethora of challenges that presented. I think we've tried stroking, we've tried the carrot, the stick, everything. I think genuinely we need to continue the discussions with our statutory undertakers. Those discussions have been happening for many years. Maybe we need a new approach that starts to think about how can we genuinely work more closely together. Because I don't think I necessarily have the silver bullet that will give you the answer, but certainly I think we have a new agenda now, a new opportunity to actually start to really move forward with our statutory undertakers and to generate a really new approach to the way we work.
Thank you very much. Coming over to Ben now for that.
So I think that's a really important question. That's a really important question. I mean, our relationship with the statutory undertakers has got a lot better in recent years, and it really falls into 3 headings in terms of time, scale and impact. One is where they want to do something to their infrastructure under our roads or the borough's roads. We have a lane rental scheme in London whereby essentially you have to pay to occupy part of the road network if you want to dig up some of your infrastructure, which obviously incentivises the undertakers to do that as quickly as possible. The second question is where we want to do something to our road which requires them to move their equipment or us to move their equipment, and that's the question around diversions, which can be extremely complicated and expensive. And again, we're working very hard with all the main utilities to get that right. And then the third interesting question is where you want to bring about a complete step change in the capacity of those networks. For example, Vauxhall 9 Elms is going to hugely increase the volume of housing along beside the Thames between Vauxhall and Battersea. And the Thames Water, the electricity companies, National Grid, have to substantially increase the overall capacity of their networks to support a very quick growth in population. And working out how you can get the regulatory regime in place so they can make the investment to massively increase their capacity rather than tinker with it at the margin is a really interesting challenge where you've got high levels of growth in the short term.
Have you got tips?
Well, I think that there are arrangements like the National Joint Utilities Group. I think local relationships are really important, as you've heard from other speakers. And I think just staying very closely in touch and making sure that you have good operational relationships, if only because if you get a burst water main, you need to get that thing fixed as quickly as you possibly can to get the network back in operation.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you thank our panel, please, for this session? We're not back inside this room till after lunch at 2:15, but in a few minutes at exactly 12:40, you'll be able to hear again from Jim O'Sullivan, the Chief Executive of Highways England, over on the keynote stage. There's a whole raft of activities happening during lunch, more events from stands, industry briefing theatres, networking and so forth. There's a second lunchtime keynote at 2 o'clock from Sampo Heetanen, who's flown in from Finland to talk about mobility as a service, and you're going to find all the details in your event guide, and there's various signs around the venue. I just want to thank Tarmac very much for sponsoring this session, and do go out and hear from Jim O'Sullivan. Thank you.